Right, so according to the World Health Organization, polio mainly affects children under 5 years old. And the stats showed us that 1 in 200 kids affected end up with irreversible paralysis. Here to talk prevention, side effects and treatment, medical doctor Roxanne Richards and microbiologist Professor John Lindo. Good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Welcome to Smile Jamaica.
Thanks.
I told the story of my brother going to a country back in the 60s with a football team, and the goalkeeper came back and apparently contracted, or is that the word you use, polio in that country. That was back in the 60s. Was it prevalent then, or what was going on back then?
Right, so it was basically, the epidemic was essentially in the 40s and 50s, and then the vaccine started around in the 50s. So after that, it was a significant decrease in the amount of incidence and prevalence of.
What is polio?
So polio essentially is poliomyelitis. Polio or poliomyelitis is a disease that's caused by the polio virus. It's essentially what we call an enterovirus, meaning that it's transmitted from the fecal-oral route, meaning that it usually affects humans by ingesting contaminated foods or drinking contaminated waters, and then it's basically colonizes, or it lives in the gastrointestinal tract, which is basically the oropharynx, the stomach, the intestines, and then from there it can spread to the spine and cause significant nerve damage. And that's what affects the muscles and causes the weakness and things of that sort.
I said paralysis.
Paralysis,
if that happens, can you walk again after that or no?
Well, there's a few different phases. There's the acute phase where you might get a temporary paralysis and you might be able to, usually people are able to regain their walking ability. However, once it reaches the paralysis phase, which is basically after about 2 years of contracting the virus, it tends to be irreversible.
Professor Lindo, we made quite a few strides as far as polio is concerned in terms of vaccinations and so on. What is the latest? We're working towards eradication.
We are working towards eradication, and Doc and I are here because we are Rotarians, of course, and Rotary International is very, very big on polio eradication. So since the introduction of the vaccine, then, we have seen significant reduction in the transmission of polio. What we are working for is the end of polio. In the same way we've ended smallpox as a human disease, we want to end polio. So we have made significant stride, we mean the world, and led by Rotary and partners, including the World Health Organization, CDC, UNICEF, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So as we stand today, we have 2 countries. We have 3 countries that are considered endemic, and that is Afghanistan, which this year had 19 cases, Pakistan, which with 9 cases, and Nigeria, although it has not had a case this year, is still considered an endemic country. So what we're doing is try to, through vaccination, see the end of this disease. Now, there are 25 cases in a big world, and you may say to yourself, the end is near. And Rotarians like to hold up their little finger and say the end is near. The end is actually near, however, we still need significant interventions to make sure that we get there. And why is that? Because the forefront of ending the epidemic, of course, is vaccination. And we use mostly an oral polio vaccine with a few drops on the tongue of children. Now, it is very difficult to get to some places in the world. And the thing is, none of us is safe until every child has been vaccinated and we have been polio-free. So we cannot relent on polio. So my friends ask me, so John, you have 25 people, why don't we just find them, vaccinate them, and then it's like that? It doesn't work that way. We actually pumping billions of dollars into polio eradication. There are so many different aspects to polio eradication. In some areas, we have, what we want is high coverage, greater than 90% of children vaccinated. Because that way they are protected, and not only are they protected, but as Doc said, the the virus lives in the intestine, and when you pass stools out, other children who are maybe not vaccinated can come into contact with the polio vaccine through ingesting contaminated water, which is a good thing in that case. So what will happen is that they develop what is called herd immunity. So we are trying our best to cover as many children as possible.
Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Richards, the professor just mentioned one way that it presents itself, but how would I know, say, God forbid I had it, how does it present?
Right. So as of note, about 70 to 90% of cases are asymptomatic, meaning that you don't have any symptoms. About maybe 20%, pretty much you'll have like minor symptoms, like stage 1 where you have GI symptoms. You might have stomach upset, vomiting, throat pain. Those usually resolve. And there's another phase of that, which is about 1 to 5% of people develop central nervous system symptoms, where you might develop what we call polio meningitis, or bulbar meningitis, or other paralysis, temporary paralysis. So those are some of the symptoms that you might develop, but usually they resolve. So it's only about less than 1% of cases that actually develop to the debilitating paralysis that don't resolve.
Yeah. Professor, I deliberately didn't say the country where my brother went and contacted the disease. Not my brother didn't, but I deliberately didn't say that. But are there any countries, you mentioned a couple, are there any countries in the region that would have recently had any cases?
We saw our last case of polio in the Americas in a little boy in Peru in 1991. So we've been polio free.
Okay.
And again, this doesn't mean that we can sit back and celebrate. We cannot burst in the balloons just yet. We have to be doing strict surveillance. So any acute paralysis is treated as a class 1 notifiable disease. So once you see a patient, and there are different viruses and other infectious agents which can cause paralysis, including Zika. So what we do is once we see a case, we have to investigate that case using the laboratory and using the surveillance system to make sure that this is not a polio case.
Yeah, I've said this before, and maybe it's not as simple, or it's obviously not as simple, or it would have been done. But you talk about the measles and the this and the that. Why we can't just inject everybody when they're born and ensure that these things don't happen to them? I know I've asked the question before. It seems to me, as a non-medical person, why don't we do that instead of wait till them start school, and if you're traveling, you have to get this first? Why we don't just do that in the hospital?
Well, actually, they do. It's a part of the immunization schedule. According to the CDC, they recommend 4 doses of immunizations, first at 2, then 4, then 6 months, and then the other from 4 to 5 years of age. So it's a 4 series, and we actually do that. It's a part of the immunization
But you just
schedule.
said like 4 and 6 years old. Why?
No, because it depends on where the immune system has developed at that time.
Right.
So we don't have a magic bullet to just give every baby a joke.
So it wouldn't be as effective if you did it earlier.
Okay.
So
Oh, so that is, it would not be what Dela just said. It would not.
no,
be,
there's no the vaccine doesn't work like that.
But there are some that you would do at birth. Isn't it?
No, it has to do with basically the immunity development in the child. So at those specific time intervals would be the appropriate time for the administration of the vaccines.
Does that mean you wouldn't be able to catch that disease before you get to that age?
Well, it's kind of it's kind of a continuation. So you're immunized at that age, and then your body sort of changes, and then you are kind of a booster in a way, right?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it's being eradicated.
Locally, when last would we have heard of a case?
Right. So it was eliminated in Jamaica in 1982. Was the last.
1982.
Right. 1982 was the last. Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah.
Is there anything special that's going to be happening with the Rotary in terms of, I know it's an ongoing project, but is there anything particular that's happening?
So Rotary celebrates World Polio Day because we have a big program called Polio Plus, and I'm asking everybody listening and watching to donate some money to Polio Plus, either through your local Rotary club or online. But we on October 24, Rotary across the world launched these massive vaccination days for polio. Sometimes we take it for granted that we live in this nice country with roads and cars and everything, but there are other countries that have challenges, civil war and strife, ethnic cleansing, all kind of things that stop people from getting vaccinations. Okay. The vaccine itself is cheap. The massive investment is how do you sensitize people? How do you change cultural practices? How do you convince religious leaders to come on board and so on?
I was just going to say some religious...
Yes, so people in the media, for example, the media, just the whole logistics of getting to children. And the sad fact is that if you don't get to them, you're at risk.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
From the Rotary Club, medical doctor Roxanne Richards of Ocherius, and microbiologist John Lindo of New Kingston. He's a past president. 10 minutes to your health. We'll do it again next Thursday.